The sterile scent of isopropyl alcohol and the sharp pinch of a needle entering the crook of my arm were sensations I had experienced dozens of times before, routine and forgettable, yet I had no idea that this specific extraction of deep red fluid was the first domino in a chain reaction that would detonate the foundation of my entire existence. Before I unravel the tapestry of lies that was my life, I want to take a brief moment to thank those of you who have subscribed and liked our content. For your support might seem simple to you, but it makes us very happy and keeps us going. Plus, please tell us what would you do if you were in this situation. Write it down, as replying to your comments makes us happy. My name is Arthur Sterling, and for 40 years, I walked this earth with the absolute certainty of who I was. A certainty anchored in the steady, predictable lineage of the Sterling family. A line of stubborn, hard-working men with cleft chins and a genetic predisposition for woodworking and silence. I was a history teacher by trade, a man who built his career on the importance of records, dates, and bloodlines, preaching to bored teenagers that knowing where you came from was the only way to understand where you were going. It was a Tuesday in November when the illusion began to fracture. The sky was a bruised purple, threatening snow, matching the somber mood that had settled over my household for the past 6 months. My father, William Sterling, the man who had taught me how to shave, how to drive a stick shift, and how to look a man in the eye when shaking his hand, was dying. His kidneys were failing, the result of a silent, genetic condition that had skipped a generation, or so we thought. Dialysis was taking its toll, draining the color from his face and the strength from his once formidable frame. He was fading, becoming a ghost in his own armchair. The doctors had been blunt: without a transplant, he would not see another Christmas. The waiting list was long, a hopeless scroll of names where time was the enemy, so naturally, I stepped forward. I was his son. I was his flesh and blood. It was not even a decision, it was a reflex. I would give him my kidney, and he would live, and we would continue our quiet, stoic existence. I went to the university hospital for the compatibility screening with a light heart, buoyed by the purpose of saving my father. I remember joking with the phlebotomist, a young woman with bright pink scrubs, telling her to take as much as she needed because it was going to a good cause. I was proud. I felt a surge of adrenaline at the thought of the surgery, imagining the scar as a badge of honor, a physical manifestation of the bond between father and son. I went home that evening and called my mother, Eleanor, telling her not to worry, that the tests were just a formality and we would likely be scheduling the surgery within the week. She sounded relieved, her voice cracking with that fragile hope that terrified me more than her despair. 3 days later, I was grading papers in my study when the phone rang. It was Dr. Evans, the nephrologist overseeing my father's case. His voice was professional, clipped, devoid of the warmth I had expected. He asked me to come into the clinic immediately. He said there were complications with the test results. I assumed it was something minor, perhaps my cholesterol was too high, or maybe I had a low iron count that needed to be addressed before surgery. I did not panic. I grabbed my coat, told my wife, Sarah, that I would be back in an hour, and drove to the hospital, listening to a podcast about the fall of the Roman Empire, completely oblivious to the fact that my own empire was about to collapse. When I arrived, Dr. Evans did not meet me in the examination room. He ushered me into his private office, a small, windowless space cluttered with files and medical journals. He closed the door and sat behind his desk, folding his hands on top of a manila folder. He did not look at me immediately. He looked at the folder, then up at me, his expression unreadable. "Arthur," he began, using my first name, which felt oddly intimate and alarming. "We have run the panels 3 times just to be absolutely certain because errors do happen, and I wanted to be sure before I spoke to you." My stomach tightened. "Is there something wrong with my kidneys?" I asked. "Can I not donate?" "Your kidneys are fine," he said, but his eyes remained grave. "You cannot donate to William because you are not a match. But it goes beyond just tissue rejection or blood type incompatibility." I frowned, confusion clouding my mind. "I do not understand. I know matches are not guaranteed even with family, but you sound like there is something else, Doctor." Evans took a deep breath. "Arthur, the antigen markers in your blood, along with your blood type, present a genetic impossibility when compared to William and Eleanor Sterling. We looked at your parents' medical history on file to cross-reference." I stared at him, the words floating in the air like dust motes, refusing to settle into a coherent picture. "What are you saying?" "I am saying," he said slowly, as if speaking to a child, "that biologically, it is impossible for William and Eleanor to be your parents. You share zero genetic markers with them. You are not their son. The silence that followed was so profound I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights and the blood rushing in my own ears. I laughed. It was a dry, cracking sound. That is ridiculous. I look just like him. Everyone says so. I have his nose. I have his temper. Phenotypic coincidences happen, Arthur, Dr. Evans said gently. People mimic the expressions and mannerisms of those who raise them. But the DNA does not lie. We tested for paternity and maternity markers as part of the advanced screening to prevent graft versus host disease. You are not related to them. I stood up. I felt dizzy, as if the floor had tilted on its axis. You are wrong. Mix-ups happen in labs all the time. You swapped my vial with someone else. We did not, he said, firm but kind. I supervised the retest myself. Arthur, I know this is a shock. But medically, I cannot proceed with the transplant. And ethically, I had to tell you why. I walked out of his office without another word. I could not breathe. I stumbled through the hospital corridors, bumping into nurses and patients, a zombie in a corduroy jacket. I reached my car and sat there for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel until my hands ached. It was a lie. It had to be a lie. I was Arthur Sterling. I had photos of my mother pregnant with me. I had seen them. I had photos of my father holding me in the delivery room. I remembered the stories of my birth, how it was a blizzard in 1983, how the car almost slid off the road on the way to the hospital. Those were my foundational myths. They could not just be erased by a vial of blood, but doubt is a parasite. Once it enters, it feeds. I drove not to my home, but to my parents' house. It was a modest 2-story colonial on the edge of town, the house where I had scraped my knees, had my first kiss on the porch, and mowed the lawn 1,000 times. It looked exactly the same, yet it felt like a stage set, a facade made of cardboard and paint. I parked in the driveway and sat staring at the front door. My father was inside, dying, waiting for a kidney I could not give him because he was a stranger. I let myself in with my key. The house smelled of lemon polish and the metallic tang of my father's medicine. My mother was in the kitchen, making tea. She looked up when I entered, her face lighting up with that weary, hopeful smile. Arthur, she said. Did you get the schedule? When is the surgery? I stood in the doorway, looking at this woman, this small, bird-like woman with gray hair and kind eyes. I looked for myself in her face. I looked for my chin, my eyes, my hairline. I saw nothing. For 40 years, I had seen resemblance where there was only projection. Mom, I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. We need to talk. She froze. The spoon clattered against the ceramic mug. Her maternal instinct, honed over 4 decades, sensed the catastrophe before I even articulated it. She wiped her hands on her apron, her movements nervous and fluttery. What is it? Is it your father? Is he worse? It is about the test, I said, stepping into the kitchen. The doctor told me I cannot donate. Oh, Arthur, she sighed, her shoulders slumping. That happens. It is a shame, but we will find another donor. We will put flyers up at the church. We will. Because I am not a match, I interrupted, stepping closer. Because I am not his son. And I am not yours. The silence returned, heavier this time, suffocating. My mother's face went pale, draining of blood so quickly I thought she might faint. She gripped the edge of the counter. She did not ask me what I meant. She did not laugh it off. She did not say the doctor was crazy. She looked down at her feet, and in that small, defeated gesture, 40 years of reality shattered into a million irreparable shards. You knew, I whispered. My voice broke. You knew all this time. She began to weep. It wasn't a loud sob, but a quiet, keening sound that tore at my heart even as my anger began to boil. She pulled a chair out and collapsed into it, burying her face in her apron. Arthur, please, she sobbed. Who am I? I demanded, my voice rising. I am 40 years old. Who am I? Where did I come from? She looked up, her eyes red and swimming with tears. You are my son, Arthur. You have always been my son, biologically, Mom. I shouted, slamming my hand on the table. The noise made her flinch. Whose blood is inside me? Because it is not yours and it is not Dad's. She took a shaking breath and reached for a napkin. Sit down, Arthur, please. I remained standing. I felt like a prosecutor in a courtroom, interrogating a hostile witness. I needed facts. I needed dates. I needed names. It was 1983, she began, her voice barely a whisper. You know we tried for years. 7 years. Miscarriages. Failed treatments. It broke us, Arthur. It nearly destroyed your father. We wanted a family so badly. And then we met a woman. A woman? What woman? She was young, my mother said, staring at the floral pattern on the tablecloth. She was in trouble. She was from the city, staying at the shelter where I volunteered. She was 7 months pregnant and she was terrified. She couldn't keep the baby. She had complications. Dangerous people were looking for her. My mind raced. This sounded like the plot of a bad movie, not the history of a history teacher. So you adopted me? Legally? She hesitated. That was the moment the floor truly fell out. We wanted to, she said. But she was scared of the paperwork. She said if she filed anything official, the father would find her. She said he would hurt the baby. She wanted to give you to someone safe, someone who would love you and never let him find you. We were desperate, Arthur. We were so desperate and we had so much love to give. So you bought me? I asked, the bile rising in my throat. No, she cried. No, never. We helped her. We paid for her medical bills. We gave her money to start over somewhere else. And when you were born, we had a friend. A doctor who was willing to adjust the birth certificate. To say you were born to us at home. I stared at her in horror. This was a felony. This was kidnapping. This was fraud. My entire identity was a crime. The birth certificate I had used to get my passport, my driver's license, my marriage license, it was a forgery. Does Dad know? I asked, though I knew the answer. Of course, she whispered. We did it together. We swore we would never tell you. We wanted to protect you. We wanted you to be ours completely. And you were, Arthur. You are. DNA doesn't make a family. Love does. We raised you. We nursed you through chickenpox. We paid for your college. We loved you every single day. I backed away from her. I felt contaminated. Every memory I had was tainted now. The snowy night of my birth? A lie. The stories of my resemblance to my grandfather? A lie. My medical history? A blank slate. Who was she? I asked. What was her name? My mother shook her head. We never used real names. She called herself Mary. That is all I know. Do not lie to me. I roared. You have lied for 40 years. Do not lie to me now. You must have something. A phone number. A last name. A photo. Anything. She stood up and walked shakily to the pantry. She reached up to the very top shelf, behind the dusty terrines and holiday platters, and pulled down a small, rusted tin box. It was an old cookie tin, the kind used for sewing supplies. She held it out to me. She left this, my mother said. She made us promise to give it to you if the truth ever came out. But we hoped it never would. I took the tin. It felt heavy, heavier than it should have been. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped it. I looked at my mother one last time. She looked old, frail, and terrified. I wanted to hug her. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to burn the house down. Instead, I turned around and walked out the door, the tin box clutched to my chest like a grenade. I sat in my car in the driveway, the engine cold. I looked down at the tin. I pried the lid open. Inside, there was no money, no jewelry. There was a single photograph of a young woman with dark, haunting eyes that matched my own, standing in front of a building that looked like a sanatorium. And beneath the photo, a folded piece of yellowed notebook paper. I unfolded the paper. It was a letter, written in jagged, hurried script. It was dated November 4th, 1983. To my son, asterisk it began. If you are reading this, I have failed. Or maybe I have succeeded. I don't know anymore. They told me I was crazy. They told me you didn't exist. But I know I carried you. I know I saved you. Do not look for your father. If you find out who he is, run. Run as far as you can. Your blood is not just blood. It is a key, and they will kill to get it back. I read the letter 3 times. A chill that had nothing to do with the November wind settled into my bones. Your blood is a key. I looked back at the house. My father was dying inside, needing a kidney. My mother was weeping in the kitchen. And I was sitting in a sedan, 40 years old, holding a letter from a ghost that suggested my very existence was part of something dangerous, something that had been buried for 4 decades. I started the car. I couldn't go home to my wife yet. I couldn't go back to the hospital. I had to know. I looked at the photograph again. In the background, barely visible, was a sign on the building's gate. St. Jude's Home for the Unwanted. I put the car in reverse. My life as Arthur Sterling was over. The man who drove away from that house was a stranger to himself, a man without a past, driving headlong into a future that threatened to be far shorter than he had ever imagined. The blood test had not just revealed an adoption, it had triggered a hunt. And I had a terrible feeling that I was the prey. I drove toward the city library. I needed to find out where St. Jude's was. I needed to know who Mary really was. And most of all, I needed to know why my blood was worth killing for. As I merged onto the highway, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my wife asking if I was okay. I didn't answer. I couldn't. How do you tell your wife that her husband is a fabrication? The sun began to set, casting long, bloody shadows across the road. I turned on the radio to drown out the silence, but the static sounded like whispering voices. I was 40 years old, and I had just been born again, not in a hospital, but in the cold, hard light of a betrayal. And this new life was going to be a fight for survival. I checked the rearview mirror, paranoia already setting in. Was that black SUV following me? Was I being watched? Or was I just losing my mind, just like the woman in the letter claimed they said she was? I was about to find out. The search for my identity had begun, and there was no turning back. The first step was St. Jude's. The second step was staying alive long enough to ask the questions my parents, my kidnappers, had spent a lifetime avoiding. I pressed the accelerator, driving into the gathering dark. The public library was a fortress of brick and glass, standing silent against the encroaching darkness of the November evening. I parked my car in the furthest corner of the lot, nestled between a rusted pickup truck and a dumpster, hoping the shadows would swallow the sedan whole. My hands were still shaking as I killed the engine, the silence of the cabin rushing in to replace the hum of the road. I sat there for a moment, clutching the rusted tin box to my chest, breathing in the stale air of my old life while staring out at the terrified uncertainty of my new one. I was a history teacher, a man who spent his days illuminating the past for others, yet I was currently stumbling through the pitch-black corridor of my own history without a flashlight. I entered the library, the automatic doors sliding open with a soft hiss. The warmth of the building washed over me, smelling of old paper and carpet cleaner, a scent that usually brought me comfort but now only made me feel nauseous. I nodded to the librarian, a woman named Beatrice whom I had known for a decade, but I avoided her gaze, terrified that she might see the fracture in my soul, the terrifying knowledge that Arthur Sterling was a fiction. I made my way to the archives section in the basement, a windowless room filled with the hum of microfilm readers and the dusty smell of forgotten news. I needed to find St. Jude's Home for the Unwanted. The name sounded Dickensian, a relic of a crueler time, but the letter was dated 1983. That was modern history. I sat at a terminal and began my search, my fingers flying across the keys. For the first 20 minutes, I found nothing but obituaries and zoning permits. Then, I widened my search parameters to include the surrounding counties and the keywords from the letter. A hit appeared on the screen, a digitized scan of a newspaper headline from the Daily Gazette, dated November 10, 1983. 3 days after the letter in the tin box was written. 6 days before my recorded birthday. The headline was stark. Inferno claims St. Jude's Asylum, 12 feared dead. I leaned closer to the glowing screen, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The article detailed a catastrophic fire that had gutted the facility, which was described not as a home for unwed mothers, but as a private sanatorium for patients with rare blood disorders. The official cause was listed as faulty wiring, a convenient excuse that history has taught me usually covers a multitude of sins. I scrolled down, reading the names of the survivors. There were none listed. The records had been destroyed in the blaze. But there was a quote from the director of the facility, a Dr. Lionel Vance, expressing his deep sorrow over the tragedy. I wrote the name down on a scrap of paper. Lionel Vance. The article mentioned that the facility had been funded by a private grant from a pharmaceutical conglomerate called Ethelgard Biologics. I typed that name into the search bar. The company had dissolved in 1985, its assets liquidated and absorbed by a larger, multinational corporation whose name was ubiquitous in every pharmacy aisle today. I sat back, the plastic chair creaking under my weight. My mother, my adoptive mother, had said the woman was in trouble, that dangerous people were looking for her. If St. Jude's was a facility for blood disorders, and Ethelgard was funding it, then Mary was not just a pregnant woman in trouble. She was a patient, or a subject. The letter said, "Your blood is a key." The pieces were starting to click together into a picture that terrified me. They were not treating her, they were studying her. And by extension, they were studying me. I reached into the tin box and pulled out the photograph again. I held it under the harsh fluorescent light of the microfilm reader. The woman, Mary, looked so young, her face gaunt but her eyes burning with a fierce intelligence. I looked closer at the background. The gate behind her had a crest, partially obscured by ivy. It was a double helix wrapped around a sword. I squinted. That was not a religious symbol. It was the logo of Ethelgard Biologics. She was standing inside the facility grounds. I flipped the photo over. I had missed it in the car, in the dim light of the driveway, but here, under the magnification of the reader's lamp, I saw faint indentations in the paper. Someone had written on the back of the photo with a pen that had run out of ink, leaving only the ghostly impression of letters. I took a pencil from my pocket and lightly shaded over the indentations, a trick I had learned from a detective novel I read in junior high. Letters began to emerge from the white void. An address, 421 Willow Creek Road, and a single word beneath it, basement. My breath caught in my throat. Willow Creek Road was an old industrial road about 20 miles north, an area that had fallen into disrepair after the steel mills closed in the 90s. Why would she write that address? Was it a safe house? A hiding spot? I gathered my things, shoving the photo and the notes into my pocket. I had a destination now. I checked my watch. It was nearly 8 in the evening. Sarah would be frantic. I pulled out my phone to call her, to tell her a lie that would buy me time, but as I looked at the screen, I saw a notification that made my blood run cold. My banking app alerted me that my credit cards had been suspended due to suspicious activity. All of them, simultaneously. I stood up, panic rising in my chest. This was not a coincidence. I had driven away from my parents' house 3 hours ago. Someone was already pulling the strings. I turned off my phone and removed the SIM card, my hands trembling. If they could freeze my accounts, they could track my GPS. I was being hunted by an enemy I could not see, an enemy with the power to erase my financial existence in the blink of an eye. I left the archives and walked briskly toward the exit. The librarian, Beatrice, waved at me. "Good night, Mr. Sterling," she called out cheerfully. "Good night," I replied, my voice sounding hollow. I wondered if I would ever see her again. I wondered if Mr. Sterling would even exist by tomorrow morning. I stepped out into the cool night air. The parking lot was darker than before, the streetlights flickering with an ominous rhythm. I walked toward my car, my keys woven between my knuckles, a pathetic weapon for a history teacher. As I reached the row where I had parked, I froze. A black SUV was parked directly behind my sedan, blocking it in. The engine was idling, a low, guttural growl that vibrated in the asphalt. The windows were tinted pitch black. I stopped 10 feet away, my instinct screaming at me to run. The rear door of the SUV opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a charcoal coat that looked expensive and tailored. He had a face that was entirely forgettable, bland and smooth, the kind of face you would never pick out of a lineup, which made him all the more terrifying. "Arthur," he said. His voice was calm, reasonable. He did not shout. He spoke as if we were old friends meeting for coffee. "You have something that does not belong to you." I took a step back. "I do not know who you are. You have the tin," the man said, taking a step toward me. "And you have the blood. We can do this the hard way, or we can go somewhere quiet and discuss the terms of your repatriation." "Repatriation?" I stammered. "I am an American citizen. I am a teacher. You are Asset 7, the man said, his voice devoid of emotion. "And you are overdue for your checkup." He reached into his coat pocket. I did not wait to see what he was pulling out. I threw my heavy messenger bag at him with all the strength I possessed and turned on my heel. I ran back toward the library, but he was between me and the entrance. I swerved left, sprinting toward the line of trees that bordered the parking lot. "Secure him," I heard the man say calmly, presumably into a radio. I crashed through the hedges, branches tearing at my jacket and face. I scrambled down a muddy embankment, sliding on the wet leaves, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I heard heavy footsteps behind me, crashing through the brush with the efficiency of a machine. I reached the bottom of the ravine and scrambled up the other side, bursting out onto a residential street. I did not stop running. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. I wove through backyards, jumping fences, terrifying a golden retriever, until I found myself in a crowded shopping plaza 3 miles away. I collapsed onto a bench outside a 24-hour diner, gasping for air, sweat soaking through my shirt despite the cold. I was 40 years old. I had high cholesterol. I was not built for this. But as I sat there, watching the ordinary people buy their burgers and shakes, I realized that Arthur Sterling might not be built for this, but the son of Mary was. I had survived the run. I was alive. I checked my pockets. I still had the tin. I still had the photo. And I had the address. Willow Creek Road. I could not go home. I could not use my cards. I had $40 in cash in my wallet and a half tank of gas in a car that was currently blocked in by a government hit squad. No, not government, corporate. I stood up. I needed a car. And for the first time in my life, the history teacher who prided himself on law and order realized he was going to have to steal one. I pulled my collar up against the wind and started walking toward the older part of town, where the cars were older and the locks were simpler. I was going to find out what was in the basement on Willow Creek Road, even if I had to burn the whole world down to light my way. The wind bit through my thin corduroy jacket as I trudged toward the industrial district, a part of town I had only ever seen in passing from the safety of my heated sedan. I was a criminal now, or at least, I was about to become one. Necessity had stripped away the moral qualms of the history teacher and replaced them with the raw survival instinct of a hunted animal. I found my salvation behind a dilapidated tavern called the Rusty Anchor. It was a Ford pickup truck, its body eaten by rust, sitting under the flickering yellow light of a street lamp. It looked abandoned, but through the grime of the driver's side window, I saw the glimmer of keys dangling from the ignition. It was a miracle born of someone else's carelessness. I looked around the empty lot. A dog barked in the distance, and the distant hum of the highway served as a reminder of the world I was leaving behind. I grabbed a jagged piece of concrete from the crumbling curb. With a silent apology to the owner, I smashed the small triangular vent window. The glass shattered with a sound that seemed deafening in the silence. I reached in, unlocked the door, and slid onto the cracked vinyl seat. The cabin smelled of stale tobacco and old grease. I turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life with a defiant rattle. I threw it into reverse and peeled out of the lot, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Willow Creek Road was 20 miles north, a desolate stretch of asphalt that wound through the skeleton of the old steel mill district. As I drove, the city lights faded in the rearview mirror, replaced by the encroaching darkness of the forest. The heater in the truck blasted air that smelled of burning dust, but I could not stop shivering. I was driving toward a ghost story. The address on the back of the photo, 421, felt like coordinates to a graveyard. I reached the turnoff just as the moon broke through the heavy clouds. Willow Creek Road was little more than a gravel track now, overgrown with weeds. I killed the headlights to avoid being seen, navigating by the moonlight and the crunch of tires on stone. I drove for a mile until the trees opened up to reveal a clearing. There it stood. Number 421. It was not a house. It was a sprawling, single-story structure built of gray stone, half swallowed by ivy and decay. The roof had collapsed in places, and the windows were gaping black eyes staring out at the night. It looked like a place that had been dead for decades. I parked the truck in the tree line and approached on foot, the rusted tin box heavy in my pocket. The front door was hanging off its hinges. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight. I pulled out my phone, thankful I had kept it even without the SIM card, and used the flashlight. The beam cut through the dust, revealing peeling wallpaper and rotting furniture. I moved through the hallway, checking the rooms. A kitchen with rusted appliances. A living room with a moldering sofa. It seemed like a normal, abandoned home, until I found the door under the stairs. It was not a wooden door. It was heavy steel, reinforced and painted a dull industrial green. It looked out of place, a piece of a bank vault dropped into a farmhouse. The lock was broken, melted by what looked like a blowtorch years ago. I pushed it open. It swung silently on well-oiled hinges, defying the decay of the rest of the house. I descended the concrete stairs. The air grew colder, sterile. At the bottom, the flashlight beam revealed a space that made no sense. It was not a basement. It was a facility. White tile floors, remarkably clean. Metal gurneys pushed against the walls. And in the center of the room, a large, glass-walled observation chamber. I walked toward the glass. Inside, there was a single chair and a desk. On the desk sat a computer terminal that looked far too modern for a house abandoned in the 80s. A small green light pulsed on the tower. It was in sleep mode. It was waiting. I stepped into the glass room and touched the keyboard. The screen flickered to life. No password prompt, just a single video file centered on the desktop, labeled with today's date. My breath caught in my throat. Today's date. I clicked play. The screen filled with static, then resolved into the image of a man sitting in this very chair. He was wearing a lab coat. He looked up at the camera, and I stumbled back, gripping the edge of the desk to keep from falling. The man on the screen was me. Not a lookalike, not a relative. It was my face, my eyes, my scar on the chin. But he was older, perhaps 60. "Hello, 7, the man on the screen said, his voice a weary echo of my own. "If you are watching this, the experiment has finally breached containment. Welcome home." The man on the screen, Drive. Lionel Vance, leaned into the camera lens, his eyes tired and hauntingly familiar. "You are not a natural-born human, 7, he said, his voice scratching through the cheap speakers. "You are a genetic replicate. A clone, created from my own DNA sequence in 1983 to serve as a biological reservoir. I was dying. I needed a heart, a liver, a kidney. You were the spare parts." I sank into the chair, the room spinning around me. I was not just adopted. I was not just an orphan. I was a product, a manufactured object designed to be butchered so that a wealthy scientist could cheat death. "But Mary," the recording continued, "the nurse assigned to monitor your incubation. She saw a child where we saw a commodity. She took you, she hid you, and for 40 years, the project remained dormant. But now, my organs are failing again. And the investors, they want their return on investment. Your blood contains the modified telomeres we engineered. It is the fountain of youth, Arthur. And they will drain you dry to get it." A heavy thud echoed from the floorboards above. The man from the parking lot had found me. "Take the drive," Vance's image commanded. "It contains the names. The senators, the CEOs, the royals. Everyone who bought a life at the expense of another. It is your insurance, and it is your weapon. Destroy it, and they will hunt you forever. Expose it, and you burn their world down." The screen went black. I looked at the small black rectangle plugged into the console. I yanked it out, feeling the cold metal bite into my palm. I heard the slow, deliberate footsteps descending the concrete stairs. "Arthur," the calm voice called out. "There is nowhere left to run. We just want to bring you back to the family." I looked around the sterile lab. I saw a row of large gas canisters used for the cryo storage units. I grabbed a heavy wrench from the workbench. I did not answer. I moved silently to the canisters and twisted the valves open. The hiss of escaping gas filled the room, smelling of rotten eggs and chemical death. The man in the charcoal coat stepped into the light of the lab. He held a pistol with a silencer attached to the barrel. He saw me standing by the back exit, a heavy steel fire door. "Do not make this difficult," he said, raising the weapon. "You are valuable property." I held up a road flare I had taken from the truck. I popped the cap. The striker hissed, and the room was bathed in a blinding, crimson light. The man's eyes went wide. He lowered the gun. "You will kill us both." "I am not real," I said, my voice steady, sounding exactly like the man on the video. "So I cannot die." I threw the flare into the cloud of gas and slammed my shoulder against the fire bar of the door. The explosion was a physical blow, a concussive wave that threw me out into the wet grass of the backyard. The heat seared the back of my neck. I scrambled up, my ears ringing, debris raining down around me like fiery snow. The house groaned, the windows blowing out in a shower of glass and orange flame. The secret of St. Jude's was turning to ash. I ran to the truck. I drove away as the inferno consumed the laboratory, the evidence, and the man who wanted to harvest me. I was alone on the dark road, the red glow of the fire fading in the rearview mirror. I reached for my phone and dialed my mother's number. She picked up on the first ring. "Arthur?" She wept. "Where are you?" "Arthur Sterling is dead," I said softly. "But I am still here. And I am coming for them. All of them." I hung up and threw the phone out the window, watching it shatter on the asphalt. I touched the hard drive in my pocket. I was a history teacher no more. I was a ghost with a list of names, and class was in session.